The morning brief ended early when the forecast changed. The wind was climbing faster than expected. By 0900, dust was already dragging in ropes across the ground, thin and snake-like, drawn toward the southern barrier wall. The command team issued pullback orders to the forward snipers and spotters posted beyond the ridgeline. Two teams came in loud, shaking off gear, teasing the storm for being all bark and no punch. Quinn received no pullback. No one spoke to her. She wasn't in the rotation anymore. The Overwatch shack, where she spent her hours, wasn't listed on the manifest as anything more than fallback storage. It leaned a few degrees west. Its supports bowed and sun-warped, wrapped in netting that fluttered like dry skin. Most didn't go near it unless ordered. She went, because no one ordered her anywhere else. Inside. The space was barely wide enough for the stool, the scope rail, and the shallow crate she used as a table. That was where she went with her rifle and logbook. That was where they left her. Her rifle had no nickname, no digital readout, no rails. It was bolt action, matte black, and rubbed smooth where her cheek had pressed the stock too many times. The others called it museum glass, a joke that made it halfway around the camp last month when someone said it still smelled like the Korean War. Quinn had cleaned it the night before. Not for inspection, no one asked her to, but because the bolts stuck at certain temps. And she didn't like the drag. She checked the lens. Then, the windage knob. Still smooth. Still good. The flag outside hadn't caught fully yet, but it was twitching with rhythm now. A steady left push. 30 degrees. Maybe 35. She marked it in her notes. The logbook was worn thin, its coil bindings snagged with grit, and the corners were soft like linen. Inside, the pages were filled with graphite arcs and angle maps, adjusted for terrain slope and mirage distortion. She didn't write for show. These numbers were for her. They helped her think straighter. Earlier, near the tent, one of the rotating gunners had looked up and grinned without slowing down. He called over to his friend that Quinn must be taking her storm tan break, then added, "Careful, those glass sights might magnify the sun, could melt the rifle right through her hands." The friend laughed hard enough to cough. Neither looked at her when she passed. Neither stopped. Quinn said nothing. She didn't carry a tablet, didn't check the new forecast loop. She had her flag and her scope. That was enough. The makeshift blind gave her a full arc over the Southwash, a basin of dry rock and shale that shimmered under mid-morning heat. She didn't expect movement. She didn't expect orders either. The radio crackled with intermittent bursts, mostly requests for extension slots and range closures. Nothing directed to her. No task assigned. She sighted in anyway. Her scope swept slow across the horizon, then settled on a natural choke, a low break in the ridgeline where the sand collected in deeper waves. A thermal pocket shimmered upward like a mirage. No shape, no motion, just a possibility. She logged it with a timestamp. Her stool creaked as she shifted slightly to ease pressure on her left knee. The habit was reflex now. By late morning, the tower confirmed all snipers were pulled from field rotation. Quinn didn't sign the log. She wasn't listed. She watched the wind change. The flag outside snapped louder now, no longer playful. The fabric had darkened with dust. From inside, she could hear sand scraping against the front plate of the wall, soft and constant like dry paper pulled across stone. The others were either off-grid or in the tents. One truck passed behind the yard with gear stowed fast and sloppy. A medic glanced at the blind but kept walking. No one paused. No one checked her line. Quinn adjusted the elevation dial again. Just half a click. The movement was fluid and silent. Her breathing slowed on its own. She leaned forward and pressed her cheek to the stock. Her right hand traced over the grip edge, then steadied. Her left slid beneath the barrel, loose but centered. The routine had no drama. It had weight. Outside, the flag reached full horizontal. The tie snapped twice against the pole. Quinn didn't flinch. She adjusted her scope clarity and tracked back toward the wash. No movement, no signal. Still, she watched. There was no call for her. That was understood. Her name wasn't on the schedule. Her rifle wasn't certified past 100.0 in crosswind. Her presence was tolerated the same way the shack was because it took more effort to remove than to ignore. Still, she logged the drift. Still, she watched. By the time the roof behind the generator bay gave a sharp metallic groan from the windshift, she had already made 2 corrections to her range notes and added a mark beside the slope entry. It was a small circle. No one would see it. It was enough that she did. The quarters were quiet that night. The kind of quiet that came not from sleep, but from exhaustion. Across the concrete hall, one door thumped closed, muffled laughter spilling briefly through before vanishing into the walls. The others had finished their final gear checks hours earlier and now traded stories, food wrappers, and downloaded films. Quinn remained in her bunk, back against the wall, logbook open across her knees. Her space was Spartan but ordered. 1 blanket, 1 metal cup. A crate beneath the bunk held her field gear, all of it coiled and packed by hand. The overhead bulb flickered every few minutes, throwing faint shadows against the locker door across from her. She didn't mind. The dim light made the graphite easier to read. She ran the numbers again. Wind conversion against elevation drift at 700 meters. Correction factor, if dust distortion pushed more than 20% across the lower third. Her pencil moved in steady loops, pausing now and then to sharpen itself against the edge of her boot heel. She flipped back 3 pages and double-checked a note she'd made last cycle. There had been a calculation error, then small. Just a single decimal, but she still remembered how it felt. That itch at the base of her neck that told her something was wrong before the math confirmed it. The logbook pages were curved and soft now, like leather soaked and dried too many times. The corners were stained with sweat and dust. It was not meant to impress anyone. It was meant to remember what others forgot. In the top shelf of her locker, behind a field ration box and an old scope cloth, lay a folded sheet of paper. The ink had bled slightly from moisture. The edges were torn at one corner. It was a commendation, issued after her first deployment. She had flagged a miscalculated target distance on a combined op, marked it, radioed it, rechecked it 3 times. She'd been right. The shot would have missed. But a senior officer had already confirmed the fire order. Her correction was noted after the fact, privately. The official debrief didn't include her name. The round landed off by 10 meters, clipped nothing but terrain. She wasn't reprimanded, but she wasn't praised either. She was not rotated forward again for 6 weeks. The commendation arrived 2 months later, unsigned at the bottom. She never hung it. She kept it anyway. Below the locker shelf, wedged into a side pocket of her ruck, sat a wind meter with a cracked screen. The numbers glitched when pressed. She no longer used it for readings. She used it to train against every evening. She turned it on, noted the incorrect output, then stepped outside and gauged the wind by sound, by skin, by the flick of a cloth edge against her wrist. She wrote that down too. There were no patterns to her training, only cycles, wind, then elevation, range, then heat. She rarely timed herself. Accuracy mattered more than speed. The others mocked her note pages, once said she was writing poetry for her rifle. She hadn't replied. She'd just closed the book and returned to her bunk. By morning, they'd forgotten the joke. She hadn't. That night, as voices drifted down the corridor low, amused, occasionally sharp, Quinn rechecked her pencil line. Then she reached over and wound her watch. It was mechanical, brass-backed, and required a full wind each night, a gift from a range instructor who hadn't stayed past his 2nd year. He'd told her once that machines built before screens had more to teach. She believed him. The watch ticked softly as she wound it. The sound was barely audible, but her ear could separate it from the hallway noise, from the creak of pipes, from the settling dust in the corners of the ceiling. She finished the page, tapped the eraser twice near the final value, and closed the logbook. Her bunk creaked as she turned sideways and placed the notebook in her gear crate, spine down, so the pages wouldn't curl. She didn't mark the chapter or date. She'd remember. Outside her door, someone passed humming a song she didn't recognize. Another pair of boots moved past slower, voices fading behind them. Quinn didn't move. She pulled her blanket over one leg and leaned back against the wall. She didn't think about tomorrow as a threat. She didn't think about what would go wrong. She just pictured the wind, not the storm itself. But the minute before it broke the way, the tension shifted in the air. How the leaves bent in unison. How dust jumped before the gust hit. That was what she wanted to track. That was what she planned for. Her fingers curled once over the edge of the mattress. The bulb flickered above her, then steadied. She glanced toward the watch, still ticking. Then she whispered, to no one in particular, tomorrow will hold. By mid-afternoon, the wind had crossed from nuisance to full obstruction. The flag outside Quinn's blind was stiff and horizontal, snapping in sharp rhythms that sounded like warning shots on metal. The light had turned the color of ash, too bright to be dusk, too dim to be day. It distorted everything. Even the rocks across the wash shimmered like water. Through her scope, the entire world pulsed. The drone feed died just before the call came through. One long tone, then silence. Then a clipped update drone. 2-9 lost to visibility. Asset fallback engaged. Quinn adjusted her scope and swept the ridge again, moving with the wind in her mind rather than her hands. The lens was already layered in a film of fine grit, cleaned 3 times since morning. She used her thumb now to brush a fresh smudge away from the left edge. Then she saw it. Movement. Not clear, not sharp, but not random. A slow ripple across the upper line of the ridgeline, where heat distortion flickered differently. The shape didn't match terrain. Not an animal. Not wind. She tracked it with a half breath held. It reappeared. Then another. 5-second intervals. Human pacing. She reached for the radio clipped beside her mat, pressed the call key. The static hiss was immediate. She tilted the antenna upward, adjusted the placement. This time, the channel cleared slightly. Eyes on movement, she said. Ridge north by northeast. Top arc behind Stone Crescent. Thermal silhouette tracking slow. Possible formation. There was a pause. Then command replied, voice filtered and half lost to wind shear. Copy last. You are the only visual in sector. Drone confirms no contact. Drone is down, she answered. This is direct line of sight. Repeat. Possible formation. 5 silhouettes at least. Moving east with concealment. The delay was longer this time. Then the voice returned, less patient. Negative fire clearance. Do not engage. Wind conditions unstable. That range is outside your safe bracket. Confirm hold. She stared down the scope again. One of the shapes had lowered to prone. Another adjusted something near their chest. Possibly a scope or spotter setup. The recon team was still 500 meters from the choke point, visible on Quinn's second grid. She could already see their heat trail from earlier exposure. They were walking straight into a sight line. Request override, she said. Target has position on our forward recon. Engagement opportunity closing. Static came first this time, then a new voice, higher ranked, clipped tone. That's a no. We're not wasting ordnance on ghosts. Hold your fire. Sniper. Let the situation play out. Quinn didn't speak. She didn't move. Her finger rested beside the trigger well, unmoved. Her cheek was already pressed to the stock again, her breath slow. She adjusted her position by a single inch. The stone beneath her had warmed unevenly. She noted the shift in thermal distortion and dialed 2 clicks left. She didn't argue. She didn't repeat the call. In the haze beyond her lens, the formation began to change. One figure stopped. Another knelt. The prone silhouette had a long, narrow heat signature extending from shoulder to hip. Sniper. She knew the layout of that ridge. There was only one position that gave full line of sight on the choke curve and enough drop protection for cover. It was where she would be. It was the only shot that mattered. She tapped the mat once. A habit. Just enough to remind her body where it was in space. The radio crackled again. More noise than words now. Someone repeated the last order. Her name was mentioned. Barely audible. It didn't matter. She rolled her shoulder once and narrowed her vision to center. Her elevation mark was already set. The wind had not shifted off its last pattern. She adjusted for holdover by instinct. This wasn't standard range. This was 1,230 meters. Beyond doctrine. Beyond permission. She exhaled through her nose. No rush. Only rhythm. Only angle. Only pressure. Through the scope. She watched the far figure shift weight. The others moved into wider spacing. A pincer. Clean. Trained. Efficient. Not guesswork. Not wind ghosts. Real. The recon team was still walking. No comms to them. No uplink. No drone. The storm had killed every eye but hers. Only she could see this. And no one believed her. She felt her spine settle. Just slightly. Her left elbow dug in with familiar weight. The shooting mat beneath her shifted with the gust, one corner fluttering under a loosened rock. Her thumb slid forward. Her glove creaked softly at the seam. She had no orders. She had the shot. Her voice came low, not defiant, just sure. I see them. The storm had narrowed the world to shape and motion. The sound outside Quinn's blind was no longer just noise, it was presence, constant and pressing. Like the desert itself was speaking in one long breath. The wind howled past her position in full force now, lifting grit against the side panels, turning the thin walls into percussion. But inside, it was still. She lay prone, elbow pressed deep into the mat, cheek settled along the worn leather rest. Her eye tracked only one shape now, the long, low silhouette of the prone figure across the ridge, 1,230 meters. Sniper arc, lateral wind, cross 15 knots, gusting up to 20. No digital readings, no sensor feeds, no confirmation, just grit, instinct, and every equation she had built by hand. Quinn adjusted the windage dial by one click. Her thumb brushed the faded scar on the inside of her trigger hand, a pale crescent tucked just above the joint. It wasn't from combat. Years ago. A spring had snapped during dry fire. The metal had sliced her open to the bone, but it healed. And now, that line of skin felt weather like nothing else. It twitched slightly when the wind began to shift. She recalculated drift and adjusted for mirage compression. The sight picture pulsed. The ridge swam with distortion. But she had already mapped the angles in her mind. The prone enemy was almost fully cloaked beneath the slope. What gave him away was the length of the barrel. Too long for the angle. Too static against the rhythm of the terrain. She tracked it, breathing through her nose. Slow and steady. Beneath the scope rail was a folded cloth gray, creased and soft at the corners. It had belonged to her father, one of the only things she kept from him. He had told her once that a rifle was not an extension of the body. It was an extension of trust. She never cleaned her lenses without that cloth, and it never left the blind unless the shot mattered. She set her left palm flat against the mat, grounding. Her wrist tensed slightly. Her breathing slowed. The radio hissed in the background. Her name was spoken again, followed by another order to hold. She didn't answer. She didn't flinch. Her world had narrowed to length and angle, to weight and wind. Through the lens, she watched the prone figure shift again. One elbow moved, the other hand steadied against the ground. There was no doubt anymore. This was not an idle scout. This was a trained shooter ready to fire. Two other figures had shifted into wider flank positions, both in low crouch. Weapons angled. A full setup. The recon team was still advancing, unaware. They were 70 seconds from the ridge break. Quinn breathed out. Not all at once. She let it go in layers, easing tension out of her shoulders and down through the floor. Her heart rate dropped another beat. This wasn't calm. It was control. Her finger touched the trigger. Not fully, just enough to feel it. Her shoulder flexed inward. Her weight settled behind the shot. Her body formed a line she had practiced thousands of times, never for credit, never for praise. A gust rolled through the blind, sharp enough to nudge the mat beneath her. She didn't react. Let it pass. In the silence that followed, she pressed. The shot cracked once. The rifle kicked back against her shoulder, steady and complete. The sound was devoured by wind before it crossed the rocks. There was no echo, only motion. Through the scope, the prone figure collapsed. Not thrown, not rolled, but drawn downward in a single, final line. The other shapes burst into scatter movement. One dropped and crawled. Another pivoted, searching for origin. There was no return fire. The team at the base of the slope froze. Then they dove. No one had warned them. No one knew what had happened. Quinn did not move. She stayed on the scope, eyes tracking, breathing level. She worked the bolt with one smooth motion. The casing flew back, bounced off the mat, and vanished into dust. She did not look for it. Her next round settled. She readjusted slightly, keeping her cheek low to the rest. Right eye steady. The ridge remained quiet now. No more motion. The ambush collapsed before it began. Quinn did not speak. Not to command. Not to herself. Her hand stayed ready. She didn't celebrate. She recalibrated and waited. The storm tapered by late evening. The horizon sharpened slightly as the wind peeled away the heavier dust. The ridgelines returned in silhouette, jagged and low beneath a sky the color of scorched steel. At the forward post, the last hour passed in silence, broken only by the soft chirp of intermittent radio updates. Quinn remained at the blind until her relief arrived. No one rushed her. No one spoke. Back at base, the recon unit returned without ceremony. 5 soldiers stepped off the transport, sand streaked across their gear, faces tired but intact. They didn't offer words or gestures. The lead, Sergeant Mason Hart, walked directly toward the command tent. His helmet was still clipped to his pack. He didn't slow when the guards at the entrance stiffened. Inside, the air felt denser than usual. The lights buzzed slightly from storm residue clinging to the fixtures. A group of officers stood around the center map table, their voices low. On the central display, the mission log cycled through a summary. 5 personnel exfiltrated. No injuries. 1 enemy KIA. Source unverified. At the bottom, a red asterisk blinked beside a single entry unauthorized discharge at 14:12 hours. The first voice broke the room's rhythm. It came sharp and low from the operations lead. Who took the shot? There was no reply. Quinn stepped forward from where she had been standing at the margin of the room. Her voice was calm. That was my round. From the blind. Several heads turned. One officer adjusted his collar, squinting like he wasn't sure he'd heard her correctly. Another flipped open a clipboard, scanning down the roster. You were not in the engagement rotation, he said. There was no clearance, no go command. I tracked movement for over 7 minutes, Quinn answered. The formation crossed a high point on the northern ridge. I logged thermal pacing intervals. Target setup was consistent with sniper spread and overwatch pattern. A younger officer, stiff-backed with fresh insignia on his shoulder, gave a tight shake of his head. That's over 1,200 meters. That ridge is not visible to that range post in this weather. No digital rangefinder. No elevation assist. That shot doesn't exist. She didn't argue. She opened her logbook. The spiral binding caught once before she flattened the pages. The paper was curled at the edges, heavy with graphite. Dozens of entries ran along the margins. Wind corrections, terrain indexing, dust distortion notes, all handwritten. She slid the logbook onto the table. Beside it, she placed a topographic map, the kind printed on weather-resistant paper. The notches were hers. Short marks denoting angle. Thin, shaded arcs showing line of sight. No exaggeration. Just fact. A silence formed as the group leaned in. One officer pointed at the angle adjustment. "This arc correction is manual." "It is," Quinn said, "factored against mirage layering and crosswind disruption. Barrel drift noted from shot 110 forward. This one was round 112. "You tracked that by feel?" he asked, not dismissive, just uncomprehending. "I've logged over 400 hours with that rifle," she replied. "Its pattern is consistent under stable mount conditions." Another officer tapped the screen on the mission monitor. The KIA logged was confirmed by recon. Quinn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Sergeant Hart stepped forward then, his voice low and direct. "That round dropped the shooter holding our arc. He was set up on the ridge. I saw his scope just before it flashed. Then it didn't. She took the shot. Saved all 5 of us." He looked around the room, making eye contact with the lead staff. "You can argue the math later. The result isn't theory." The room stilled. One senior officer, the same who had challenged the legality of the range, stared at the field map. He didn't touch it. He just followed the marked arc with his eyes, reading the data in silence. The flickering screen behind him continued to list the kill as unconfirmed. Protocol moved slower than clarity. Another officer broke the pause with a muttered line meant for no one in particular. 1,230 meters in that wind. His voice wasn't skeptical anymore, just small. Quinn stepped back from the table. She didn't collect her logbook. She didn't restate her case. The facts sat plainly between them now, still smudged from her thumb. No one thanked her. No one apologized. But they saw her, and they didn't ask again who fired. The wind changed direction 2 mornings later. Not by much, just enough that Quinn noticed it before the base weather system did. She marked it quietly, one note in the margin of a fresh page, before folding the sheet over and tucking it behind her logbook's back cover. By the time the command update posted its minor adjustment, she had already cleaned her scope and packed the bolt for inspection. No one had said her name. No commendation. No announcement. But people moved differently now. In the mess tent, one technician mentioned seeing a colonel leaning over a set of ballistics charts late into the night, frowning over a wind correction entry scrawled in graphite. Someone else whispered that doctrine packets were being quietly updated for long-range edge case engagements. The forms were still labeled experimental, but they circulated faster than usual. She didn't ask to see them. She already knew what they said. Her logbook had disappeared from the bench one afternoon. It reappeared the next morning in the exact same spot, its pages carefully realigned. The only difference was a copy tag in the inside cover. Later that day, an assistant from the training division stopped her outside the range gates. He looked hesitant, almost embarrassed. They had a request, he said. Could she write out her wind math, just the shorthand? No need for formal language. Internal training use only. No signature required. Quinn nodded once. That was all. In her bunk, tucked beneath the edge of her pillow, she found a folded scrap of paper. No header, no seal. Just a sentence in pencil, the kind that didn't ask for reply. You don't need permission for what you did. She read it once, then folded it again and slid it between the final pages of her logbook. The air felt different on the range. The same dust, same heat, same drills, but the noise around her softened. No more sideways jokes, no more smirking glances. No one asked if her scope still used chalk and compass. They still didn't speak much, but they stepped aside when she passed. Even the officer who had questioned her in the debrief now nodded when she entered the yard. Just once. Not exaggerated. Just present. Quinn said nothing. She never changed her pace or posture. She logged in at the same time. She checked the flag before looking at the terminal. The wind didn't care if anyone had noticed her, and neither did she. One morning, just after 0600, a trainee waited by the gear bench at the edge of her range post. He stood with his boots square and his hat tucked under one arm. He looked younger than she expected, still stiff with classroom posture. He asked if this was the right lane. She said yes. Then he asked if he could borrow the bolt action, the old one. He'd heard it still held true at 100.0, maybe more. He didn't phrase it as a challenge. He said it with respect. Quinn brought it out of its case already cleaned, already zeroed. She passed it to him without a word. He took it carefully, as if afraid to drop it, and laid it across the mat with both hands. That was enough. Later that day, she returned to her locker after drills. Inside, resting in the foam lining, was a new rifle, long-barrel precision platform, factory mat. It was still tagged for first-time calibration. A red card hung from the bolt. Eyes on. No paperwork. No signature. Just her initials, etched discreetly into the stock Q. T. She ran her fingers across the bolt assembly once, then let the lid fall closed. She didn't bring it to the range that week. Not yet. It would wait. Instead, she spent more time with the trainees. They asked careful questions. She gave short answers. She showed them how to track dust lift at a distance, how to read tree lean and shadow pinch, how to listen for the wind inside their own posture. She didn't mention range totals. She didn't tell them what she had done. They learned anyway. One of them brought her a notebook, said he wanted to build a correction chart the old way. She flipped through it. The spacing was wrong, the math clumsy, but it was a start. She handed it back without critique. That Friday, just before sundown, she returned to the blind alone. The flag was slack. No wind yet. The light was yellow across the wash, soft along the ridge where it had once mattered most. She laid down slowly, letting her body settle into the mat with practiced ease. Beside her, the newest trainee mimicked her stance. He adjusted his grip twice. She corrected it once, a soft tap to the wrist. Then she pointed toward the ridge. "Watch that slope," she said. "The wind breaks there first. You'll see it in the dust when it lifts." He nodded. She could tell he didn't fully understand yet, but he was looking. The flag twitched once, a small pulse, then again, slightly stronger. She reached forward, adjusted the focus knob by feel, and narrowed her eyes. The air had shifted. She marked the wind before it arrived, and waited. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never asks to be heard. Quinn was overlooked, doubted, and left out of the roster, but she never stopped preparing. When the storm rose and lives hung in the balance, it wasn't command or protocol that answered. It was her one shot, one decision. And suddenly, the invisible woman at the edge of the map was the only one who saw what mattered. Her story isn't about defiance. It's about discipline. It's about knowing your worth, even when no one else does, and showing up anyway. If you've ever been underestimated or told to wait your turn, remember this story. Let it remind you that quiet strength is still strength, that preparation is its own kind of power. If this spoke to you, leave a comment, share your own story, and follow for more moments where silence meets clarity and changes everything.